Hello, my name is Sarah Schwalberg. I'm an occupational therapist for Cleveland Clinic Children's Therapy Services. And today we are going to talk about taming tantrums. If you would like to read or learn a little more about me, feel free to pause your video and read some information if you'd like. So the goal of today is to be able to learn about and tell the difference between what is tantrum behavior versus what's a meltdown, um, to recognize what are the common causes of tantrums and meltdowns, to learn how to prevent tantrums and meltdowns from occurring, to learn how to address tantrums and meltdowns when they do occur, and to learn how to support your child's social emotional skill development, which in turn will hopefully help with the preventing the tantrums and meltdowns and addressing them when they do occur. All right, so let's talk about behavior. Oftentimes, the word behavior tends to have a bit of a negative connotation with it. Like, oh, my child is misbehaving, or, they have bad behaviors. But in the world of psychology and in the medical world, the term behavior it actually just means any action that a person does. So it doesn't have to be good or bad. It just is. So a behavior is any observable or measurable action that a child or a person does or performs. So a behavior, an example could be just a person tapping their pencil when they're sitting in class, or a kiddo jumping up and down and clapping their hands when they're happy. So a behavior, doesn't have to be associated with, something negative. It just is something that a person does, any action that a person does. However, we a lot of times, when we hear behaviors, we think of, is that behavior helpful or not helpful? So the term maladaptive behaviors are actions that a person does that is interfering with their daily life or someone else's daily life. Actions that maybe are disruptive, um, and then um, or actions that might not be very helpful to that kiddo. So often maladaptive behaviors occur when someone is feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated, tired, hungry, dysregulated. Maybe they don't have their basic needs met. Maybe they aren't wanting to do something, or maybe there's something they're wanting that they can't have. Or maybe they are still developing some of their cognitive skills, social emotional skills, or communication skills. So, things to ask yourself. Are your child's behaviors posing a safety concern, either to themselves or to others? Are your child's behaviors preventing them from learning or preventing them from, doing their daily activities? Are your child's behaviors preventing your family from, going to places in the community or, social outings? Or are your child's behaviors due to having difficulties with certain skills, like being able to communicate, or difficulty with coping skills? And so there's a concept that we call the functions of behaviors. And what this means is, typically any behavior or action that a child or person does has a purpose behind it. And so what we try to do is we try to figure out what is the purpose of the child acting in this certain way. Why did they engage in this behavior? So in the world of psychology and the medical world, we tend to categorize functions of behaviors into four categories. So often a kiddo might be acting a certain way either because they're seeking attention or there's something they want or something that they want to avoid or to make their bodies feel right. So we'll start with seeking attention. Again, this also tends to have a little bit of a negative connotation associated with it. Like, oh, my child just wants attention. But in reality, a lot of times when a kiddo is wanting attention, what they're really seeking is connection. Um, but so you might see a kiddo who starts yelling or hitting whenever, the mom talks with older sibling. And then, kid starts trying to make a scene. And that might, look bad. But in reality, the function of the reason why the kiddo acted that way might be because they were seeking attention and therefore they were seeking connection. They wanted to be involved. So a lot of times, this again, will have a negative connotation, but a lot of times it's really just a form of trying, to be connected with everyone else or, obtaining a reaction. So another common reason for why a kiddo might act in a certain way is that maybe they want something, um, which doesn't have to sound bad. All humans want things. So a child maybe, is hoping to do a certain activity or wants to go somewhere or wants an item or a toy, or they're just trying to achieve a goal or a desired outcome that they're wanting. So one example might be, in the grocery store or, at, a local Target or Walmart type of store, the child sees a toy or a food that they really want, and maybe they start screaming. Um, and with the hope, so the goal of that child screaming and causing a scene and fussing is their hope is that, oh, mom is going to give in, so they're going to give me a toy. Um, on the other hand, a child might present with a different type of behavior to achieve that same desired outcome of getting the toy or the food. Uh, so a lot of times you might hear people say, "Oh, that kid is on their best behavior right now," because maybe another kid to achieve that same goal might try to be extra helpful or extra kind that day. So, and with the hopes of, oh, maybe if I'm really, really good, mom might get me this toy I'm really wanting. So, trying to obtain, something that the child is wanting can involve a variety of different actions. Some that might be considered adaptive or helpful, and some that might be considered maladaptive or unhelpful. But either way, a common reason for a child acting in a certain way, helpful or not, is often due to the child wanting something. Other common reasons for a child acting in a certain way might be to avoid or escape something. And this also tends to have a bit of a negative connotation with it. Just even the words in itself, escape or avoid. But there might be a lot of reasons of why a child is trying to escape or avoid something. You know, if a kiddo goes and kind of throws all of their toys when, mom goes and say, hey, it's time for bed, or hey, it's time to go brush our teeth and get ready for bed. It might look like, oh, the child's misbehaving or acting badly. They threw all their toys. But maybe they're actually just trying to prolong the time before they have to go brush their teeth because maybe they don't like the feeling. Maybe it feels uncomfortable when the bristles touch their gums, or maybe they find the flavor of their toothpaste too strong. Or maybe there was one time where the kiddo had a cavity or they had a loose tooth and it hurt when they brushed their teeth. And now every time, they think of toothbrushing, it makes them anxious. Or maybe the kiddo just doesn't want to stop playing because playing is fun. Um, so even though it can sound negative, a lot of times there could be a reason why the child is trying to escape or avoid something. So escape or avoidance is another common reason why a child might, do a certain action or act in a certain way. Another common reason might be for sensory stimulation. So maybe a child is tapping their foot in class or rocking their body a little bit in class because it helps them be a little less anxious or nervous, or it helps keep them more alert and ready to learn. Or maybe a kiddo is jumping up and down and clapping when they're happy just because it makes their body feel good. It's their way of expressing themselves. Or maybe a kiddo is, looking at an item out of the corner of their eye because they like how that looks. And if they like how that looks, maybe it makes their body feel good. So other common reasons of why a child might do something or act in a certain way might be to, obtain more sensory stimulation to make their body feel better. So as a recap, all behaviors or actions have a purpose, and a kiddo might engage in certain ways, whether it's to get attention or connection, or to get something they're really wanting, or maybe avoiding something that they don't really want. Which often, if they're getting something they want or avoiding something they don't want, they're also in a way achieving the feeling of safety. When a kiddo is avoiding brushing their teeth, that maybe is internally making them feel safer because brushing their teeth maybe makes them feel unsafe. Or the other common reason is that they're trying to help their body feel more regulated or feel just right. So now let's talk a little bit about tantrums versus meltdowns. And so there can be overlap between the two, but tantrums are more so defined as a behavior or action that a child is presenting with that is typically a response to not receiving something that they were wanting or something not happening that they were expecting. On the other hand, meltdowns are defined as a behavior or action that a child presents with that typically is a reaction to that child feeling overwhelmed. So let's talk a little bit more about tantrums. So there's typically always a purpose or a reason for the tantrum, just like how we talked about before. There's always a purpose or a reason for a certain action that a person does. So with tantrums, though, compared to meltdowns, which we'll get into more in a minute, children tend to have more control over their actions. So for example, let's say that kiddo in the grocery store is really, really wanting a fun treat, fun snack. And, uh, maybe if mom ends up giving in and gives them that snack, they stop their screaming and everything's all better. So how intense the tantrum is can fluctuate though, depending on what's the reason for the tantrum. What is the child trying to achieve? Are they also trying to test their, how their actions will make their parents react? Which testing boundaries is a normal part of development. But so tantrums are more so in relation to, the kiddo wanting something or not wanting something and how they act in response to that. On the other hand, meltdowns typically are more so in relation to when there's too much going on in the kiddo's brain. Whether they're, at a loud place and there's just too many sounds or too many lights, or there's too many decisions for them to make. And they have so many thoughts in their head and they don't know what to do. So meltdowns are typically more so related to overwhelm or overstimulation, and they're the reactions to the big feelings that they get when they're overloaded with sensory stimuli or they're overwhelmed with thoughts. So for meltdowns, they don't often involve the child trying to achieve a goal, um, other than trying to feel more regulated or safe. A meltdown might not occur because the child's wanting a toy. Maybe it's because the environment's too busy. The store is really crowded and really loud, or there's a lot of lights, or they can't make up their mind on something. Meltdowns are considered to be the results of a kiddo going into fight or flight. Uh, a lot of times when it comes to a meltdown, the kiddo might not even know what they want. Like maybe, the kiddo's melting down and mom tries to give them, oh, do you want your toy? Do you want your pacifier? Do you want the snack? And the kiddo doesn't know and they're just still crying. And then often with meltdowns, the child might continue to be upset and dysregulated even after they were to get something they want. So, like I was mentioning before, there are a lot of times can be overlap between tantrums and meltdowns, because often if a kiddo doesn't get something they want, they might start to get frustrated and then might start to get overwhelmed. And then it's really hard to get them to calm down. Um, and even maybe once you give them that toy they wanted, if they had worked themselves up so much, it doesn't really matter. They're still upset. Getting that toy isn't cutting it. So there can a lot of be overlap between the two concepts, but sometimes there can be differences, especially when, if the tantrum behavior was just, kicking, or stomping and screaming after they were told the word no. Um, if they were to then be told, all right, fine, we can do this. We can do what you want or get what you want, and then they're perfectly fine, that's probably more what we would consider a tantrum behavior versus the kiddo who just can't calm themselves down. They're melting, they're overwhelmed or overstimulated. That might be more so a meltdown. But a lot of times the two can go hand in hand. So reasons why someone might be more prone to having tantrums or meltdowns can be often due to age, like babies, toddlers, preschoolers, young children, like young elementary school children, or um, individuals, children or adults who have maybe delays in certain developmental skills. Maybe they don't have the language skills yet to communicate what they're wanting, or maybe they don't have the cognitive skills yet to be able to communicate what they're wanting. And often, young kids want to be independent, but they might not yet have the skills to actually be independent. Because for young children, what we call their prefrontal cortex is still developing. And until that develops more, a young kiddo isn't always going to be great at regulating their emotions. And kiddos might just be starting to understand how the world is working around them, but that can also be a little anxiety provoking once you realize how the world around you is working. And a lot of times, children might have some emerging skills, but maybe not fully have the skills yet to communicate what they want. So, for example, maybe there's a little kiddo who, maybe they know how to say the word help, but maybe they don't know how to yet put two words together and say help open if they're wanting a food package open. And maybe that's frustrating to them because maybe the parent doesn't know that they're wanting help opening their food package. Maybe the parent thinks that they were wanting help with a toy that fell on the floor, fell off their high chair tray. So sometimes even just having emerging skills, or maybe they can sometimes say the word help, but maybe they don't always remember to say it. And maybe there's times where they can't think of the word that they want to say, and maybe or just not consistently, and that can be frustrating. So just as a little brief background, and feel free to pause your screen to go over a little more about this, because I'm just going to go through it briefly. But it's always important to consider what is typical social emotional development, because what we expect from a 15-month-old should be different than what we expect from a 6-year-old and vice versa. Um, so at 15 months, kids start to, interact more with their parents. They might start engaging in some parallel play. At 18 months, it's very common that you might start to see kids asserting themselves a little more, which can often be frustrating a little bit to parents. Um, but you'll start to see kids expressing more of their wants, their needs, their emotions. And then that, of course, continues on as the kid reaches age 2. Um, Kids also around age 2 tend to become a little more jealous of others and tend to be seeking more attention and more connection than maybe they did when they were younger. And then around age 3, kids might be able to start describing their feelings a little more, and they may also start being able to talk more about other people's feelings. Around age 4, kids are starting to be able to play more with other kids, follow more rules, pay attention for a little longer, which can be important. Because if you were expecting an 18-month-old to be able to attend to you saying multiple directions, like, all right, go get dressed, or go get your coat and your hat, or go get your applesauce pouch and your goldfish. The 18-month-old might have lost you after the first word. um, so it might not be very fair to expect a younger kiddo to be able to, attend long enough to you to be able to follow whatever you were trying to direct them to do. And then around age 5, turn taking and sharing might start to improve a little more. You might be able to follow rules a little bit more. Around age 6, those things are still continuing, and kids are starting to understand their emotions a little bit better. So things to keep in mind. Key thing is always assume there's a reason or purpose for a behavior or for a kid acting in a certain way. Other things to consider, kind of what we were just mentioning about before, but are the expectations of your kiddo realistic? Are they realistic for their age or for where their development is currently at? If a kiddo has some developmental delays, are their basic body needs met? Is the child, is it close to nap time? Is it close to lunchtime? Uh, did they fall earlier and they have, a little bit of, a bruise or pain in their knee? Or could they be really thirsty? Other things to consider would also be, could the child have any underlying medical condition that might be impacting how they're acting? Is a child trying to avoid a certain, food because maybe are they always getting heartburn or constipation from that food? Or does the kiddo often appear pretty tired and also tends to act out a lot? Could they have sleep apnea? So those are all things to consider. Other things to consider are, has the child had some changes in their routines lately? Did they just have spring break and now they're back from break and now they're acting out per se? Or did the child have a substitute teacher that day and then they come home and they're acting different than normal? Or is the child getting a cold or getting an illness? Could it be that, you know, the child has expectations that are, present in one place but not another? Like at school, maybe they're used to putting their coat away and hanging it up in their cubby. But maybe at home, they were just typically used to, just kind of throwing it on the floor, or throwing it on a bench. And all of a sudden, one day, mom says, all right, hang up your coat. And the child is like, what? What do you mean hang up my coat? That's not something I'm supposed to do here. And maybe mom says, well, but you can do it at school. But the kid might not act the way, the kid might not go ahead and, hang up their coat nicely because in their mind, they didn't think they had to do that at home. So different expectations in different places is also something important to consider. Other things to consider are, does the child have communication limitations? Do they understand what you are asking them to do? Or are they able to communicate what they're wanting? Does the kiddo have difficulty with paying attention to you, with following multi-step directions that you give? Does the child have difficulty with processing their feelings or emotions? Does the kiddo have difficulty with controlling impulses? Maybe they really want to behave well, but is it really hard for them to keep their body still? Uh, is a kiddo bothered by certain sensory things? Or do they crave certain sensory things where, again, maybe it's hard to control their body a little bit? Does the child have some difficulty with motor skills or physical skills to complete a certain task? Like maybe if you're trying to have a kiddo who should maybe be able to get dressed on their own by this, by their current age, maybe they still have a little bit of difficulty with it. And so then maybe you might see a kiddo, you know, acting out in a certain way when they can't get it by themselves. Other things to consider is the importance of co-regulation. So co-regulation is someone supporting someone else. So often maybe it's an adult supporting their child by being present with their child as their child moves through different feelings and emotions. And the adult trying to stay calm and be available to support them. Maybe it also involves the adult modeling how they regulate. So an example might be a kiddo's really upset. They really wanted to go to the park, but then it started raining. So the adult, stays with them and maybe models a little bit of, you're right. That is such a bummer. I'm feeling so sad. And then maybe the adult starts to model, I'm going to take deep breaths. I'm going to take deep breaths and think of things that make me feel calm or happy, while still being available and present to help support the child while the child figures out and learns how to regulate. And so before a kid can self-regulate, they first need to be able to co-regulate. So if they can't do it with the help of an adult, it'd be hard to expect the kiddo to do it by themselves first. And so for the impact of co-regulation, this is also very important to consider. How is the adult doing? If did the child's meltdown or explosion of anger, did that cause the adult to be really anxious? Or just in general, how has the adult been? Has the parent been really stressed lately? Because all of those things can impact how the kiddo is acting too. So we're going to go over a lot of different strategies, but the key is to know every child responds differently. And often it requires trial and error to figure out what's going to be most helpful for your specific child. And this applies both for neurotypical children and neurodivergent children. And I want to mention, I should have mentioned before when I went through the slides about development, those milestones that I listed about social emotional development, those are geared towards neurotypical children. Neurodivergent children often might have a different pattern for development. So just keep in mind that the milestones I presented earlier on social emotional development are geared towards a neurotypical child's development. So neurodiversity, that refers to just everyone's brain is different. Everyone, someone who likes the taste of, mac and cheese, the person next to them might not, and that's okay. Everyone's brain is different, processes differently, and functions differently. So therefore, that means that a strategy that works for one person or one child might not work for another. Neurodivergence, on the other hand, refers to children whose brains are wired differently and therefore process things differently compared to what is considered to be the norm or typical of other children. And so something to keep in mind is that it is important to, of course, always, assume that a kid is able to do something, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. You always want to assume that they have the capability to do it. However, it's also important to keep in mind that strategies that might work for a neurotypical child might not always be the most effective strategy for a neurodivergent child. And for those who are unfamiliar with, uh, neurodivergence and common neurodivergent diagnoses, some common ones are autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, sensory processing disorder, disruptive mood disorder, bipolar disorder, intellectual disability, specific learning disabilities, which, so if you've heard of dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, those are examples. Tourette syndrome, oppositional defiance disorder, or pathological demand avoidance profile, and many more. Those are just some examples of different neurodivergent diagnoses. So it's always important to talk with your pediatrician if you're having concerns related to your child's skills. So whether you're concerned about maybe their speech or their understanding of what someone's saying, if you have concerns about how they're learning or how they are processing sensory information or their emotional regulation, always talk with your pediatrician and your child's medical team for any further guidance. It also can be helpful to talk with your pediatrician, um, you know, if you have any concerns about some potential underlying medical condition. Like if you're noticing that there's a certain food in particular that your kid doesn't want to eat, maybe it could be sensory, or maybe it could be that that kid learned that when they eat that one food, maybe it makes their chest feel weird. And the kiddo might not really have the words yet to tell you that. So it could be helpful to always rule out, is the kiddo having GERD or constipation, or are they not sleeping well? Is the kiddo always congested and maybe tends to act out a bit? Well, maybe do they have enlarged tonsils and adenoids, and then that's impacting their sleep and their quality of sleep, and then they appear, you know, to be, acting badly during the day. So it's always important to consult with your child's pediatrician. And then one thing that I want to note, so there are of course many psychologists and psychiatrists who are still giving the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder or ODD. Um, but there are also many psychologists and psychiatrists, including some within the Cleveland Clinic system, who are starting to tend to shift away from that diagnosis. Um, and so if you're ever concerned that my kid is a bad kid, or my kid has a behavior problem, or they're oppositional, um, instead of just assuming that your kiddo maybe has ODD, it's always good to talk with their pediatrician, their other medical providers, if they see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, to find out more about whether that's truly ODD, or maybe are there other things going on. All right, strategies for managing big feelings. So I'm just going to go through this briefly, but please feel free to pause your screen so you can read more about this. But one thing that can be helpful is to think about a tantrum or even a meltdown as an arc or maybe a graph. So a kiddo might, everything's going fine, they're playing, they're happy. Oh no, something happens, and now they start to get frustrated. They start to get really frustrated. And now they've just worked themselves up to maybe it went from that tantrum to that meltdown of now they're really overwhelmed and they can't even think, they can't make decisions, they don't know what will help them because they're too overwhelmed to be helped. And for those who don't know, when you think of fight or flight, think of a human running away from a bear. That is what fight or flight means. Fight or flight in the brain was designed for back in the day of the cavemen, um, who would be running away from the lion. The body's goal was run, run, run. Don't stop. Just run or fight. Don't think about anything else. Yeah, and of course, us humans have evolved a lot over, the centuries. But so something now as simple as, wait, I don't know what choice I wanted to make. I wanted the Bluey sticker and the Peppa sticker. That can cause a kiddo to even go into that fight or flight state where even once you start offering both or offering a different one, they're just too overwhelmed or too melted down at that point to be able to really function. And so then after that, they maybe start to calm down, but they're not going to really be, when they're in this state, they're still not really at a place where they're ready to learn. Maybe they're not kicking and screaming and crying anymore. Maybe they're still just like a little bit heightened and they're still just not really at a place where they're ready to go back into that loud store or back to class. And so as the child calms down, eventually, they kind of return to their baseline of how they were before. So we're going to go over strategies for some of those different areas of how to help prevent, escalation from happening, how to help prevent the meltdown from happening, how to help with calming down. So we're going to go over more of these different strategies, but again, you can pause your screen to review some of these of what to do before a trigger happens, how to help de-escalate, how to help calm. But one thing that is very important to know in order to help your child is to first figure out, well, why are they acting that way? What happened? So there is a concept called ABC data, where you look at what was the A for antecedent, what happened before the kiddo did that action. So maybe kiddo stomps their foot on the floor and smacks something off the table. Well, what happened right before that? And then what was the behavior that the child did? So in this scenario, it was the stomping and, you know, hitting something off the table. And then what happened right after? You know, did the parent come up to them and help them, clean up whatever it was that fell off the table for them and say, oh, it's okay. We can go to the park. That's fine. Because then in that case, the kiddo might have then learned that next time they want to go to the park, all they have to do again is to get angry. Or did the parent, sit with them and work with them like, I hear you're frustrated. I understand. And, did the parent help work them through and then help them work on, some maybe more helpful choices? And then did the kid from there learn, oh, I guess when I did this and I acted in this helpful way, then we were able to go to the park. So it's important to think about what happened beforehand that could have caused the action. What was the behavior or action that the kiddo did? And then what happened right after? What did the parent do? What did peers do? So here's just an example of a way that you could track, data of, the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence. So for example, mom read John a book at night as part of the nighttime routine. John starts rocking back and forth and twirling his hair. Mom continued reading the book. So what ended up happening was that John realizes, okay, if I twirl my hair and rock back and forth, I feel good. And mom continues to read the book. But the reason for him rocking back and forth was to self-soothe. Uh, on the other hand, Mom and Johnny are walking down the toy aisle. Johnny starts screaming and crying, "I want that toy." Mom buys him so that she doesn't create a scene. So we know that maybe, John wanted something tangible. He wanted the toy. But now John also might know, oh, every time I'm in the toy aisle, I'll just cry. So that way I'll get more toys. So that's why it's important to think about, well, what happened after the kiddo acted in that way. So this is all very important because you can use this concept, whether you actually take true data of, the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence, or whether you just kind of mentally are noticing it. You can use that knowledge to predict what might happen in the future. And you can try to plan ahead and come up with strategies for future things. So we'll do a little example. So let's say your kiddo loves to go to professional baseball games, but all of a sudden they stop wanting to go. And you're not sure, is it just that the kiddo is overtired at, towards the end of the game, or are they just overstimulated because it's, loud, chaotic environment? But you've started to notice that, it always happens. The kid particularly starts melting down towards the end of the game, like eighth or ninth inning. So maybe you use the ABC data method and you notice that this started to happen after one of the games you went to had a fireworks show at the end. And then you remember, my kiddo doesn't like fireworks. He was really crying and covering his ears when those fireworks happened at that game. Now you realize he doesn't want to go back to games anymore because he's afraid that there could be a fireworks show. So now you're able to use that information and know that for next time you go to a game, you can talk about it beforehand with your kiddo, and you can talk about whether or not there will be a fireworks show at the end, and that if there will, they can use noise canceling headphones, or maybe they can go to a bit of a quieter space. So this can be very helpful to be able to figure out and plan ahead to help your child. But one thing that we definitely encourage is, of course, observe the trends. But the other key thing is talk to your child. And whether the child is verbal or whether they're non-speaking and they use a device to communicate, try to find out from your child what could have been bothering them. Because even though, as parents, we're able to figure out a lot by just our own observations and intuitions, sometimes there's something that your kid knows that you don't. Because, in that fireworks situation, maybe the parent just kept assuming, oh, well, they get tired by the end of the game. That's why they don't want to keep staying at the game. Maybe the parent didn't even think of that it was the fireworks. So talk with your child and try to, whether they communicate verbally or whether they communicate via, a device or pictures, try to have them help you figure out what it is that is bothering them. Planning ahead is key. So before maybe you're going to a professional sports game or a show, pre-planning breaks ahead of time. So, if your kiddo tends to only last in loud environments for like 30 minutes, plan a break every 20 minutes. I know that might feel like a lot, but that way you're getting the kiddo their break before the meltdown occurs. So it's helpful to pre-plan breaks and to find places that you can maybe use for breaks. So maybe before you're going somewhere, looking up ahead of time, all right, so this place has a quiet space or a sensory room, or this place maybe doesn't, but it looks like there's maybe some areas over here and here that tend to be a little bit quieter. And packing with you and bringing with you, items or materials that help with calming or help, with reducing the sensory input, such as noise canceling headphones, or if it's a place that has like a lot of strobe lights, maybe packing sunglasses or a hat, um, and packing things that the kiddo can use to help calm themselves. Another way to help plan ahead is kind of what we talked about before, but talking with your child about what to expect ahead of time. And you can talk about it with them. You can use social stories where you can use pictures to remind them of, hey, we're going to be going to the dentist. This is what it looks like to go to the dentist. Oh, do you remember that when you were there last time, there was this big cool chair that you got to sit in? So cool. And going over those things ahead of time so that way when the kiddo gets to the dentist office, they're like, wait, what is this giant contraption I'm supposed to sit on? So going over things ahead of time typically reduces some anxiety associated with the situation that maybe makes them feel anxious. The other important thing for when you plan ahead is to plan for after the stressful or anxiety provoking activity. So if you know that your kid hates the dentist, it makes them feel so anxious. Would it be very fair to expect your kiddo to then go home and just do their homework, really nicely or eat their dinner really nicely? It might not. So maybe you have to plan ahead of, oh, we're about to go do this really stressful thing for my kid. Maybe, maybe we normally eat dinner at 6, but maybe tonight we'll eat maybe towards 7. So that way my kiddo can have time after the dentist to decompress and calm down before I were to expect them to be able to sit nicely at the dinner table or do their homework nicely. So planning ahead also involves planning for after the stressful or anxiety provoking activity. And the key thing to always remember is that regulation comes before expectation. So it's not very fair to expect a kid to do something if they're not regulated, meaning if they're overwhelmed or overstimulated. It's hard to learn, it's hard to focus, hard to follow directions if you're not regulated. So it's helpful to use calming sensory strategies to help the child regulate. And then depending on the situation, we'll get in more into this, but sometimes it's also helpful to use redirection strategies if a kiddo is overwhelmed with their thoughts or they're stuck on a thought. So one important thing to keep in mind is the importance of connection and relationships. And we'll get more to this, but a kiddo needs to feel safe and loved and nurtured almost as a prerequisite in order to help their brain grow and develop. So if a kid doesn't feel calm or doesn't feel that love and nurture and support, it's hard to expect their brain to develop in the way that we're wanting, which then is going to make it hard for them to develop their coping skills. So feeling seen, feeling safe, feeling secured, feeling soothed are all things that help the brain to grow. And I apologize, I see that I didn't put the link for the citation in there. With that said, all my citations are at the end of my slide. So this reference from UNICEF is at the end of my presentation, where you can pause and look up the reference to be able to look at the resource. All right, so again, we're going to talk a little about co-regulation. And so these strategies are a little bit more for how the parent, how you all as parents can use co-regulation to help your child. Number one thing, check yourself. How are you doing? While your kid is tantruming and kicking and screaming, are you getting really anxious? Are you getting really frustrated? Are you wanting to just scream at your child? Check your own body, relax your own body, get yourself in a place to where you can help your child. Once you're in that place, go sit alongside them. Standing over them a lot of times just makes a kiddo more anxious. Come sit with them, and you can mirror their feelings. You know, what we talked about before. I get it. I wanted to go to the park too. I'm feeling really sad. Oh man. And then hold space for them. Pause, listen, wait with the kiddo, let them cry instead of just being, oh, stop crying, or oh, it's okay, let's move on. Let them cry, but offer them comfort, let them know you're here for them, and model yourself of how to calm. So other strategies for helping with tantrums and meltdowns is trying to create a calming environment. So if you're somewhere really loud, really overstimulating, move to somewhere that's quieter. If there's a lot of lights, try to maybe, if you're able to dim the lights, or even if you can turn off the lights and just use the natural sunlight. You can try to limit the amount of items that are around, so that it doesn't feel like too cluttered. The other big key thing, and this is hard for a lot of people, is to limit the talking. So if your child is trying to calm down and they're just really upset, if they have a bunch of people all saying things to them like, oh, it's okay, calm down. And then you have parent number two, oh, it's okay, calm down, well, it'll be all right. That's a lot of noise right there. And then if you have sibling in the background who's singing along to a song, that's just adding more noise. And then the TV's on in the background, and Spotify's on the Alexa. That's a lot. So, let's find ways to limit some of the noises in the environment and limit the amount of people who are trying to talk to and talk at the kiddo. So here are some general calming strategies. We're going to come back to all of this, but just again, general calming strategies might be less noise, or if there is noise, having it be calming music, calming nature sounds, dimmed lighting, natural lighting, whether they're using headphones or quiet spaces, having calming lights or calming visual input, so little star light projectors for the room, holding different fidgets, rocking in a rocking chair or a parent rocking a kiddo, lying on a hammock or swinging, having something for the kid's mouth to chew on. Heavy work, which means, so heavy work is anything that involves using your muscles and your joints. So whether that is a kiddo climbing, crawling, hanging on a monkey bar, lifting something heavy, pulling or pushing, anything that uses their muscles and their joints could be considered heavy work. Deep pressure, hugs, squeezes, compression clothing, weighted clothing, crashing into couch cushions. Those are all considered deep pressure. So all of these things right here that I just said are all considered to be kind of general calming strategies. So now we're going to talk about why. Because a lot of times the concept of sensory can be confusing to people. And I don't know about you, but I find it for myself, why would I try something if I don't understand it? If I don't understand why it's working, why would I do it? So let's try to make sense of sensory. So let's start with, how would you calm a newborn infant? Oftentimes, you'll calm a newborn down by swaddling the baby, gently rocking the baby, giving the baby a pacifier, or feeding the baby, giving them a bottle, or singing a lullaby, or having calming music for the baby. In reality, what I just told you are all similar to what we just talked about. So let's think about how those would apply to you as an adult or to your child. So swaddling a baby, that's that deep pressure to the body. What that might look like for you or for your kiddo is giving your kiddo squeezes, wearing a weighted blanket or a compression vest. That rocking of the baby, what that might look like for you or for your child is lying in a hammock that's gently rocking back and forth, or riding a bike, or for your kiddo, swinging on a standard playground swing at the park. Singing a lullaby to your baby, that is that calming auditory or noise or sound input. So for an adult or for your child, that might look like listening to calming music or listening to nature sounds. For a baby, giving them a pacifier or their bottle, all involves input to the kiddo's mouth, and specifically the newborn using their muscles and jaws of the mouth, or sorry, muscles and joints of the mouth. And so if you remember that word, we talked about heavy work. People a lot of times think of heavy work as just big, gross motor activities, like carrying this heavy bin. But heavy work can also apply to your small muscles, whether it's of your hands squeezing or of your mouth chewing or sucking on something. So for an adult, what that might look like is, adult really anxiously, nervously eating, shoveling chips into their mouth while they're watching a stressful football game. Or for a kiddo, maybe it's a kiddo who prefers to eat crunchy snacks, or a kiddo who benefits from chewing on a chewy necklace. One other way to think about sensory is if you're driving a car, if it was snowing really badly or if there's high traffic, some adults might be more likely to turn the radio down. Some might also turn the radio up, depends on the person. But if it's the opposite and you're on a really long, boring road trip, you might try to turn the volume up to help yourself stay alert. Just like driving a car, adults and kids benefit from increasing or decreasing the amount of sensory input around them to be able to be in that just right state. So by turning the volume up and down, the adult adjusted the amount of sensory input their body was obtaining. And so even further for that driving a car scenario, if on Monday night, maybe one time you were able to blast music on the way home, but maybe the next time you couldn't, because maybe the next time you didn't sleep well that day, or you had a stressful day at work. So sometimes what you might need in general when you're doing a certain activity, maybe the sensory input that you need to be able to do that activity successfully might change even just depending on other situations. So if someone's on a long road trip or even just has an hour commute to home, maybe one day they need more louder music, and maybe another day they don't because they slept fine. Their baby slept through the night before. Or maybe someone is okay to deal with, some light traffic on a day where their baby's not in the car. But maybe on a day that their baby's in the car and their baby's screaming at the top of their lungs, it might be harder to deal with that traffic, even though it's light traffic. So key takeaways for making sense of sensory is it is natural for children and adults to need different types and different amounts of sensory input. And it can vary on the situation. So everyone needs sensory input, but the amount that you need at a certain time can be different. And people, especially children, perform their best when their sensory needs are met or their sensory needs are just right. So now you can feel free to pause your screen, look more at these sensory strategies, but hopefully those examples help a little bit with understanding why using a chewy necklace helps your child calm, or why giving squeezes helps your child calm. Other strategies to help with making your child feel calmer can be using grounding strategies. So some people might have heard of before the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique of, maybe your kiddo is really stuck on that. They really wanted to get this bluey toy from the store and they couldn't get it. And they're in the store and they're really upset and there's nothing else they can think of other than that toy. Well, you can try to use it's almost distraction, but if the goal is to bring the kiddo's thoughts from whatever it is that they're focusing on or worrying about to this present moment. So, hey, what was that noise you heard? Did a shopping cart just crash into that aisle? Or I can smell some really yummy food or some really pretty candles down the next aisle. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, what does this toy feel like? Just trying to find ways by using your senses or by using the kiddo's senses to help the child come back to the moment and calm down more. So one example is that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Other examples that typically help ground someone could be just taking deep breaths or progressive muscle relaxation and kind of help keep someone's thoughts on the present. Also providing what we might consider alerting or alarming input. So handing the child an ice cube when they're in the middle of meltdown. The child might go, whoa, what's that cold thing? And then from there, helping the child with calming down, trying to get their thoughts off of whatever it is that they are worried about. And so along those lines, you can use redirection or distraction to help a kiddo, especially if it feels like they are just super overwhelmed or their thoughts are stuck. So if a kiddo is stuck on the scariness of going to the dentist, helping them think of other things. And a lot of times there are a lot of tools that you can use to help distract a kiddo can also just be calming in itself. Let's say you distract a kiddo who's really nervous about starting school. Hey, let's do this puzzle. Maybe you get into the puzzle, and a lot of times even just doing a puzzle, like using their hands and focusing on other things that are a little more kind of rote or simple, can be calming in itself. With all that said, if the child is presenting with a tantrum to avoid something, you can still use the distraction strategy to help calm the child down, but you want the goal to be that they still kind of go back to what it was they were needing to do. So maybe if the kiddo is really anxious about the thought of going and brushing their hair because they have really curly hair and their hair gets really tangled easily, it hurts. So if your kid is having trouble calming down when you say, time to brush your hair, working with the child, oh, hey, what's that over there? Oh, should we go check and see what's out the window? Oh, is that a deer outside? Oh, that's cool. You can try to kind of calm the kiddo down that way if they're trying to get too heightened or escalated, but still trying to find a way of being able to still go back to brushing their hair because that's something they need to do for their hygiene. Another strategy that you can use for helping managing your child's tantrums or meltdowns or their big feelings is using what is called collaborative problem solving. With collaborative problem solving, the key message or key takeaway is that kids will do well if they can. So with collaborative problem solving, the first goal is to try to understand your child's perspective and their concerns. The second step is presenting your concerns. Third step is working together to come up with solutions that would satisfy you both. And so more about what this might look like is, kiddo wants to go to the park, but it's raining. So trying to understand, what is their perspective? Maybe their perspective is, it's the end of the fall and they're afraid that they're not going to get to go to the park again for a while because it's going to start snowing soon. And that's where they're coming from. Not just as it that can't go to the park today, but maybe it's that they're afraid they're not going to be able to go to the park again for a few months. So now you present your concern. I hear your concern. My concern is that we might go to the park, while it's raining and while it's cold out, and we might get sick, and then we won't be able to go on our vacation next week. That would be a big bummer. Or, maybe, the park tends to be pretty slippery when it's wet, and we wouldn't want to get hurt and not be able to, you know, play next week. And so once you present your concerns, not your solutions, but your concerns, then you two come up together with ways to make it work. Well, and maybe you find out, oh, your kid was just really wanting to play tag at the park. That was what they really wanted. Oh, or maybe they really wanted to use a swing. Well, hey, I hear you. You want to use the swing at the park? Well, maybe we can go to this indoor playground or indoor play place that has a swing. So that way you're still able to get the swing, but I still make sure that we don't get sick so we can still go on our vacation. So all of this, for this working together and collaborative problem solving, it might sound like, oh, you're making a compromise, but really what you're doing is you're helping the child improve their problem solving skills, improve their frustration tolerance, improve their mental flexibility. You're helping the child grow their skills to be more successful. So now we're going to go over some different types of strategies that involve maybe trying to modify the kid's behavior, or so essentially we're trying to change, how the kid is acting. And a lot of this typically involves strategies that help to, somewhat decrease their anxiety. So step number one, validation. Letting the kid know that you hear them, you see them, you get why they're upset. One strategy that often can help kiddos, especially some of our kiddos who are more concrete thinkers, is using logic. So, just telling a kiddo, hey, you have to go brush your teeth right now. Well, why? Because I say so. I'm your mom. The kiddo might not see the value in that. Maybe, of course, they maybe want to make their parent happy, but maybe playing with their favorite toy kind of slightly outweighs just making their parent happy. They might need to see more value in the reason why you want them to do something. So maybe looking up pictures online or looking through books and talking about when we don't brush our teeth, we get cavities, which can really hurt. So if we don't want to have that feeling, then it's important for us to brush our teeth. So sometimes using that logic, now the kid is like, okay, I want to play with my toy, but I don't want to get a cavity and I want to make mom happy. All right, now that's starting to outweigh the other thing. Other ways to help kind of alleviate anxiety and, impact how a person is acting is by providing the kiddo a little bit of a sense of control. With that said, you're the parent or you're the caregiver, we want you to technically be in control of the situation because you have the years of wisdom to be able to make sure everyone is staying safe and everyone is staying hygienic, all that. So we want you as the caregiver to be in control, but sometimes it can still be helpful to provide that kiddo a feeling of control. So maybe when it's time to get ready for bed, letting the kiddo pick how they're going to go put away their toys. Oh, right, it's time to get ready for bed. Oh, do you think that we should hop like a bunny to go put the toys away? Or do you think we should walk like a bear to put the toys away? So now the kiddo feels like they have say, which might make them feel a little less anxious about the fact that it's time to stop playing. Other things that can be very helpful to alleviate some anxiety and help modify behaviors would be predictability. So trying to have a fairly standard routine or structure for the kiddo, trying to maintain that when you're able. Trying to provide warnings prior to transitioning. So letting a kiddo know, hey, we have 5 minutes until it's going to be time to go. So that way, when it gets to be time to go, they're not just like, wait, what? I didn't know. I thought I could just keep playing forever. Uh, Sometimes using visuals can help, especially if there's any difficulty with communication skills, or language skills, or executive functioning skills, or memory skills. Sometimes having a visual can help make kids feel like they know more, what to expect. And then using first then language could also help. Like, maybe the kid really wants to go pick out a story and read before bed, but they have to go brush their teeth first. So using that first then language of, hey, first we're gonna go brush our teeth, and then we can go do that thing you're hoping for or expecting, which is, picking out the bedtime story. Other ways to help with, alleviating some anxiety and modifying how your kid is acting can be positive reinforcement. Now, a lot of times when people hear positive reinforcement, they think of rewards. But positive reinforcement is more than just a reward. The goal of positive reinforcement is you're trying to help encourage and promote, the helpful actions that your child does to hopefully increase the likelihood of them doing that again. So sometimes it's, let's say you're walking around the grocery store with your kiddo, and normally your kiddo tends to run off and try to go find favorite snacks. Let's say one day your kiddo is walking with you, they're staying next to you, they're not running off. Even just saying something like, hey, I love how you're walking with me and walking next to me in the store. That makes me feel really calm because it makes me not worried about, are you safe or not safe? That this is really helpful. The hope is that that kiddo then internally is like, oh, this made me feel really good about myself. Maybe I should do that more often. And of course, with that said, you can also use, one form of positive reinforcement, which is rewards. But what we typically encourage is if you're going to use a rewards or a reward system, is to try to have a plan beforehand on how you're going to fade out that reward. So sometimes some kiddos, if brushing their teeth just is uncomfortable to them, they sensory wise, they don't like it. But unfortunately, it's one of those things that you do kind of have to do in order to stay healthy. Sometimes using a reward system can help just with, getting them through that activity. Maybe you've tried all the other sensory strategy, you've modified the toothpaste flavor, you've modified the toothbrush, you have calming music, calming lighting on when they're doing it. But either way, that's still just at least a little uncomfortable. Maybe having, getting a sticker, using a sticker chart after each time they brush their teeth, and then at the end of the week, they earned all their stickers. Oh, they get to pick out or a toy from the dollar store or something. Um, you know, that can sometimes help with alleviating that anxiety because they know that there's going to be a positive outcome happening after they do this anxiety provoking activity. So with that said, what we don't want is the kiddo to always think after every day they brush their teeth for the rest of their life that they're going to get a sticker so they get a toy. What we do want is to try to see, okay, now that you've kind of gotten the hang of having to brush your teeth for a few weeks using this sticker system, maybe when it becomes not as bad or doesn't feel as anxiety provoking to you, maybe we're going to do a sticker every other day or twice a week or once a week, and then twice a month, once a month, until eventually we can fade that out. Because the goal is that as the kiddo has learned, hey, this actually isn't so bad, that they realize that, they can do it. And they might not need that reward to do it once they realize that, they're capable. And so now let's talk about punishment. So you can use negative reinforcement, or you can also use punishment as a way to reinforce the behaviors or actions that, you're wanting to see or not wanting to see. And punishments can be helpful because it can teach kids about natural consequences. Um, so, we're not saying to not use timeouts or punishments or natural consequences. They can help, but the key thing is though that research has found that positive reinforcement tends to be more beneficial as it provides more opportunity for the kiddo to learn and grow their skills, grow their social emotional skills, their coping skills. So even though this can be an option of a way to, get a kiddo to stop hitting, they go to timeout, a lot of times using positive reinforcement and, let's say the next time a kiddo uses their words instead of hitting and really praising them and reinforcing them. Oh, that I love how you use your words to tell me that you were mad. A lot of times that then promotes some learning in the kid's head of, oh, so the more I did this, aka use my words, happier my mom was, and the more I didn't get in trouble. So it's research has just found that positive reinforcement tends to be more beneficial. One strategy you can use for a kiddo who is, maybe presenting with some actions or behaviors that are not helpful or that you would like to not see is you can use planned ignoring. So, the goal would be to decrease the likeliness that your child acts that way again in the future. So let's say your child, maybe they're 7 years old. They're fully capable of using their words. Maybe this kiddo, they don't have any delays. They're fully capable of verbally and kindly telling you what they are wanting. And there was no changes in the routines that day, or there hasn't been any changes recently in their life. So that your 7-year-old is capable, if they can't reach something on the shelf, of saying, "Hey mom, I need help. I need help getting this down." But instead, maybe your child goes, "Ah," or screams, or "I can't get it." One option could be to not respond to that until they ask it in a way that is a little bit kinder or more appropriate. So maybe they go, "Ah, I can't get it." And maybe you don't respond. Give it a few seconds. "Mom, can you help me?" That would be the goal of planned ignoring. With that said, it's really important to use your judgment. Planned ignoring can be helpful, but what if your child doesn't maybe have the communication skills yet to do something? Or maybe they do at times, but it isn't consistent. That, maybe at times your kiddo is able to say help, but maybe sometimes if they're very overwhelmed, they can't think of what to say. And maybe they have a device that helps them communicate, but maybe their device is charging right now. So it's important to consider, your kiddo's skills, your kiddo's medical needs and body needs. Because maybe, if a kiddo had a hard day at school, they had a substitute teacher, maybe they got hit in the face during dodgeball or something, maybe when they come home, you might not be able to expect them to be like, "Hey mom, I need help with my homework." Maybe them going, "Ah," and then you modeling for them, "I need help." That might be enough to know that maybe plain ignoring in that moment isn't the effective solution for that kiddo. And then the other key thing to know for plain ignoring is that you don't want to ignore behaviors that could be harmful. So if a kiddo is hurting themselves or hurting others or hurting the environment, that is not a time to use planned ignoring typically. And if you do feel like it could be beneficial, that's a situation where you would want to talk with your pediatrician, talk with your kid's medical team, or therapy team or educational team to see, is that the most effective strategy for something that could be unsafe. Um, when it comes to mental flexibility and a kid being flexible with changes in routines, it can be helpful to do so, to work on those skills in structured and pre-planned ways. So what that means is maybe your kid always likes to go to the same park, and maybe their sibling is getting a little tired of that park. Maybe they want to go to a different park one day. Well, it might not be the best day to try that out on a day where your kid already is having changes in routine. Maybe their preschool teacher just went on out on maternity leave and now they have a substitute. Maybe that's not the day to try going to that new park. Or on the other hand, maybe your kiddo didn't really have any big changes in their life, but maybe you as a parent did. Maybe you know that this next week is going to be super stressful for you at work. So maybe that's not the day to work on, or the week to work on trying out a new park. Because maybe if you're not going to be in a place where you're able to help, where you're able to stay calm and therefore help your child calm down with this new change, it just might not be the most effective way to go about it. So maybe instead picking, you know what, over the next few days, there's not really many changes happening that I know of, at least to my kids' routine. There's not many changes for me. I'm in a good place mentally. So, you know what? My other kid wants to try out a new park. Let's do it. And I know that there's going to be, some hiccups along the way. I know that might make my other kiddo feel anxious and nervous, but I'm going to plan it out, and maybe I'll bring tools that help my kiddo feel calmer. Other strategies to consider um, is making sure that your child always has access to some form of a way to communicate, and keeping in mind that naturally kids will have more difficulty communicating when they're overwhelmed or upset or anxious. So that's normal. That if your kiddo, all of a sudden is just not able to use their words very well when they're anxious or overwhelmed or upset, that's normal. And we also know that our kiddos who tend to, at their baseline, be kiddos who get anxious really easily, be overstimulated really easily, they're more of the time going to have trouble communicating their wants and needs. So we always want to make sure that we find ways to be able to give kiddos ways to communicate and express their wants and needs, and honoring that different forms of communication, you know, even if you know your kiddo is verbal or speaking, they're able to tell you what they want. They're able to tell you help, please. Honoring that, you know what, my kiddo had a hard day. So maybe they're not saying the word help, but maybe they're signing the word help to me. I want to honor that because either way, they're still trying to communicate to me. And just knowing that the more we can help a kiddo communicate, the less frustrated they're going to be. Because it's frustrating when you can't tell someone what you want. Other strategies to consider can be your language as the parent or caregiver. So something that can be helpful is giving directions instead of asking questions. Because if you ask your kiddo, do you want to go potty? Well, kiddo might say, no, I don't want to go potty. So instead, if you have a goal that you're trying to achieve, aka getting your kid to go potty because you're about to go in the car, instead of asking questions, give directions. Say, hey, let's go potty. And for kiddos who maybe have difficulty with their attention or their communication skills, using more clear, concise language can be helpful. So that way they know and understand what the expectation is. Other things to consider for your language is breaking tasks or breaking directions into smaller steps. So instead of saying, get ready for school, I mean, that can mean a lot of things. Is kiddo supposed to first go get dressed? Do they need to go eat? Do they need to go pee? Like, what do they need to do to get ready for school? So instead, saying things like, right, go put on your shirt and your pants, or go get your coat. And then once they get the coat, put on your coat, zip your coat. Breaking those into small steps sometimes can also be helpful, or using visuals with them. Because some kiddos, it might be too much for their brain to process a whole routine. Other things that can be helpful is using action-oriented language versus just telling a child no. So instead of saying no hitting or no running, telling what that doesn't tell them what you want them to do. That just tells them what you don't want them to do. So, okay, fine, I won't run, but maybe I'm going to skip or frolic at high speed. Because they need to know what you want them to do. So instead of saying no hitting or no running, you could say hands down or hands in pockets or walking feet. So that way the kid knows what you're wanting and what you're expecting of them. Other things to consider for your language, kind of as we talked about before, when you're able to, giving your kiddo options or choices versus just giving them a strict directive. So knowing that maybe your kid might respond better to, instead of saying, hey, it's time to get dressed, go put on your pants, go put on your shirt, maybe telling them, hey, it's time to get dressed. Do you want to put on your shirt first or your pants first? So consider how you say things. And then also knowing that sometimes some kiddos get too overwhelmed when there's too many options. So sometimes giving specific things to choose from can also help. So instead of saying, all right, what shirt do you want to wear today? Say, do you want to wear your blue shirt or your red shirt? So again, just things to think about of how you are communicating. All right, so let's recap a little bit. As hard as it might be sometimes when your child is having a tantrum or a meltdown, just try your best. That's all we encourage, is just try your best to stay calm, to stay regulated, meaning you as the parent or the caregiver. Try your best to avoid reacting back to them, avoid yelling back at them, avoid giving in when you've already set a boundary. So I know these are all hard and are all impossible to do all of the time, but these are just things that we encourage to try to help with managing your kiddos' tantrums or meltdowns. With all of that said, though, the number one priority should always be to keep your kiddo and yourself and everyone else around you and the environment around you safe. So if there is a safety concern, one, talk with your doctor, talk with your, the kids' teachers. But number two, maybe use a safe, set up the environment to promote safety. So maybe don't leave too many toys around in the living room if your kiddo frequently has tantrums in there. So don't leave things around for them to be able to throw, or maybe just leave soft toys around. Maybe set up a calming area in the home. So, and when it comes to boundaries, it is okay to teach boundaries. It's okay to have rules. It's okay to use the word no. A lot of times, parents feel hesitant to teach the word no. It is okay to do that. You can, and it's important for your kid to learn the word no, because there's going to be times when they're in school and, they raise their hand and ask for something and the teacher says, no, not right now. So we do want kids to learn boundaries and learn rules. But with that said, one important caveat is that sometimes for certain situations, it might be more helpful for you and for the kiddo to not use the word no, to maybe avoid it, but for the purpose of using what we call action-oriented language. So that example was, instead of saying no running, saying the action you do want them to do, walking feet. So although it's important to, for a kiddo to be able to understand and tolerate and accept, parent telling them no, depending on the situation, it might just be more beneficial for your situation to use action-oriented language instead of using the word no. And one of the biggest key takeaways from this presentation for everyone is it's, of course, very important to, help develop de-escalation strategies or calming plans for when the child does have their tantrum or have their meltdown. That's very important. But it is also helpful and very, very important and beneficial to work on finding strategies that can help prevent those tantrums and meltdowns from even occurring. You're not always going to be able to prevent them, no matter how hard you try. But it's helpful to have a plan of how can we prevent this from happening, and then if it happens, how do we help it? And then the other big thing is it's very helpful to work on building up your kids' coping skills when they're calm. So instead of, teaching them how to take deep breaths when they're in the middle of a meltdown, teaching them when they're playing. Oh, maybe they're playing with their stuffed animals or their dolls. Oh, let's teach Teddy how to take a deep breath. Or, oh, let's blow in this pinwheel and see how long we can make the pinwheel spin. Teaching them these coping strategies and modeling these coping strategies when the kid themselves are calm and in a place where they're ready to learn and able to take in new information into their brain. So other big key takeaways is teaching and modeling, teaching your child about emotions and feelings, modeling your own emotions and feelings and making sure that you're doing so again at a time where your kid is calm and ready to learn. There are a variety of different emotional regulation curriculums available. There's also a lot of different emotional regulation books online and in stores that are available. Those can be ways to teach your kiddos about, what different feelings mean. But then modeling those in real time is also really helpful for kiddos. And if you're going to go read a book about emotions, doing so at a time when that kiddo is happy and ready to learn versus pulling out your book about anger when the kid's in the middle of a meltdown just might not be very helpful because kiddo might not be able to learn or take in information in that moment. And going along with all that, trying to help foster your kiddo's coping skills, your kiddo's communication skills, teaching them about calming strategies, modeling how you communicate when you're upset, and knowing that skills only grow with practice. So even if your kiddo is able to calm themselves down or communicate one time, know that it's not going to happen every time until they get more practice and see you practice it more as well. So key takeaways, if you're still with me, thank you for sticking with me. There's a lot to know about how you can help your child, if they're presenting with tantrum behaviors or actions, or if they're having meltdowns. There's a lot of ways that you can help your kiddo. So at the Cleveland Clinic, we wanted to give you different ways and tools and options of how to help. Because as we talked about before, every child might need a different strategy, and they even might need a different strategy depending on the moment of every day. But key takeaways, as we said before, as hard as you can, try to avoid giving in or avoid reacting back. Know that it is okay to pick and choose your battles. Give yourself some grace. There's going to be times that you react back, and there are going to be times you give in because you're a human. Not only are you human, but if you're watching this, you're probably a parent or caregiver, and maybe you're not getting the greatest sleep because your kiddo wakes up in the night. So please give yourself grace and know that it's okay if there's times that you react back or give in, or know it's okay to pick your battles, and know that you are not a bad parent just because your child is having tantrums. Because tantrums are a normal part of development. That's how kids learn. They learn how to test boundaries. So know that if your kid, even if they're older and they're still having tantrums, know that that doesn't mean you're a bad parent. And please seek some support or guidance if you need help. You do not have to do this alone. So please reach out, whether it's to us or to anyone else, if you are needing help. As I mentioned before, Here are my references to go over any of the information that I presented today. Please review these different resources. You can pause your screen to look more and see what the resources are. Again, here are more of my references. And again, the rest of my references. But please let us know if you have any questions, and it has been a pleasure working through Taming Tantrums with you.